Welcome to the Gain Momentum podcast, focusing on timeless lessons from senior leaders in hospitality, travel, food service, and technology. Our co-host today is Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen, how are you?
I am good. Appreciate the leadership and work on the Gain Momentum podcast. And Sondre, you know that we have high interest in what you're doing, and we look forward to understanding how that innovation is affecting travel, hospitality, fintech, etc.
Great to be here.
And of course, our guest today is Sondre Rasch, the co-founder and CEO of SafetyWing. Before we drill into our 4 questions that we structure everything around, our podcast thus far is really focused more on the hospitality side. Now we're getting into travel. And just so that we have a clear framework for this discussion, Sondre, could you give us the elevator pitch of what SafetyWing does and what it's building and the key global mega trend it's feeding into?
Sure. So what it does is it offers health insurance and travel medical insurance for digital nomads and remote teams. What it's building is to make a global social safety net and a country on the internet eventually. And the global megatrend it's feeding into is remote work, digital nomadism.
Okay, perfect. So, Sondre, our first question is, when it comes to scaling a business, what is the single piece of advice you would give entrepreneurs from your perspective as a professional in travel technology?
So presumably an entrepreneur wants to grow. Okay, I have one thing to say here, which is a little bit unique, but it sounds common. So I did one company and then did another. And there was a mistake I did in the first one that I tried to rectify in another. And I was very glad I did and kind of got the fruits of that for a long time. And that idea is sort of to focus on things that grows exponentially instead of things that grow from your efforts. People, when they hear exponential growth, they often just use it as a synonym for fast growth, but it is like a technical term. So it's like if something grows as a function of itself, that's what makes it exponential. So in a business sense, it grows as a function of customers, revenue in some way. If you need to put in money from outside the customers to grow, that can grow exponentially because as the percentage terms, as you get more customers, what you're putting in is linear, the growth rate declines over time. And there are some things that cause exponential growth. Like it's a narrow set of growth strategies that works exponentially. There are many more that don't work exponentially. So that's probably, that was how it was formulated. When it comes to scaling a business, that's probably the thing that I would suggest is to make a plan for exponential growth strategies, which often doesn't seem like they do so much in the beginning, but they increase the growth rate perpetually. And you'll be glad you did later. And I certainly was.
So interesting to that point, what you're talking about is that to understand trends, understand where there's organic growth or customer needs that have suddenly been identified, and there's been maybe general technology or geopolitical or some sort of other input that has driven this kind of momentum, and identifying the momentum and identifying what your particular offering or the better mousetrap, whatever the case may be, how it overlays on this tsunami of change, and potentially you want to be one of the authors of that change or a go-to solution set, but you're not having to build or educate the marketplace that this is even important, which a lot of companies, in all of our long experiences, you think you have an opportunity, you identify that it should be valuable to a certain marketplace, and then you spend a lot of time educating the marketplace that this requirement even exists, versus what you just said, which is leveraging this momentum and change in a way that's sufficient to grow the business.
Yeah, I generally agree that it is good to be on leveraging some sort of frontier trend, but it is also, it's advice that can be misunderstood. And there is this very similar looking behavior, which it's sort of copying. Like I remember when we started SafetyWing, it was sort of the year where everyone started parking apps for whatever reason. And I remember someone showed me that, and they're like, there's 517 parking app startups in San Francisco on Crunchbase, I think it was, and I think that a lot of them are applying, like, there is this like danger here, like when everyone jumps on the same thing, there's high competition. So yeah, you do want to leverage these sort of frontier technologies because they're, percolating out. And what makes something a trend versus a fad can be hard to differentiate. And, one of the things that I found, in a way we are in this mega trend, the shift to working on the internet and whatever is downstream of that. But at the same time, we do also find ourselves kind of without competitors and have since the beginning. And so I think if you're able to use, differentiate between enduring trends and fads, and then to kind of leverage those, but think independently on top of that, then I think you got a good combo.
One quick follow-up, Adam, before our next question is, again, my opinion, Sondre, you're the expert, you're the founder and the CEO of the company, but as someone who's purchased travel insurance and all many, many times over the last 30 years, the category has been around forever. The historical players in that space have been around forever. And in some ways, they've had to transition their business to the internet or transition their business to, e-commerce, whatever. Versus I was buying those types of products from an individual, when I started doing international travel to make sure I had all the coverages and so on. And I think what you just said about there's not a lot of competition, I think part of that is, and I think that's a good principle. If a founder or a large organization or a global organization identifies an opportunity, is it's not just about innovation. It's about, as I said, differentiation from the historical legacy companies in that space who can't pivot, who have not been able to pivot successfully to take advantage of a new mega trend. And I think that's interesting to discuss maybe in a further question. So
I would agree. I mean, so certainly travel insurance existed, and when we came up with the idea for nomad insurance, it was sort of thought, well, we wanted to make the step one towards this global social safety net, and then we imagined something like what a country offers as a membership, like health, retirement, income protection,
as a resident or a citizen.
But globally. And then the question was, well, what exists today? And it was actually day one where we realized, so travel is already pretty global. Maybe we could make travel insurance that just works anywhere and therefore becomes like global health insurance kind of. And that kind of worked, essentially. That's the genesis sort of to why we ended up in travel insurance. And the way that market is, it's mostly this long tail where everyone kind of has some local plan from their local bank or whatever. There were a couple like more global things, like World Nomads was one, but they kind of stumbled into this. For remote health, when we made health insurance when I say we don't have competitors, I mean for what we think we're trying to do in a sense. So if you were to, draw a circle around us and say that we do travel insurance, then we clearly have competitors. But for us, from the inside view, that's a means to an end in a way. But it does have that effect. One reason it worked is, I think, what you said, which is that there was this new segment, the nomads, and we knew them well because we, from our point of view, they're like pioneers into this new world that we're building for. And so that's why we could make something that to them looked pretty unique. Not totally, but pretty. And then our next product was somewhat more unique, the remote health insurance for remote teams. And then as we get to the membership in our next products, I think we'll look more and more not like anything else. But it takes a while in this.
Of course.
Well, speaking of things taking a while, maybe you had to pivot along the way. And without getting too far into the weeds of things, we're going to move into our second question, which focuses on this, which is, Sondre, what are some of the common pitfalls or failures you have witnessed that business owners should look to avoid when scaling their business?
Yeah. So one, mistake I did in my previous company, which was a freelancer platform, was scaling before the product was good. So essentially, we had gotten into Y Combinator and we sort of figured out how to grow because we focused on that through performance advertising. figured out how to grow before the product was good. And that turned out to be a very painful thing to do, because essentially for a while we could grow very fast. So throughout those months, I remember we grew like, I think it was 20% a week. It was very fast from a very low base, but we were growing very fast. We focused on that. But then eventually, we started to learn that sort of retention was low. And eventually we reached this equilibrium where where the pace that customers fell off equaled the pace we could bring them in. And this took us so long to realize what had happened, and the depth of tracking and just self-understanding and all this sort of, misplaced expectations that was that. And it was only when I got like a long distance that I realized the mistake, which was this thing. It was that we scaled it before we made it work. So with SafetyWing, we sort of committed to this preemptively, and it's essentially just to first observe people recommending the product to their friends organically before investing in growth. And I thought that was a really healthy thing to do.
Interesting. To that point, and full disclosure to viewers and listeners, the reason why Sondra's here is because I'm actually a customer, incredibly satisfied customer, which is very weird and not normally talked about on podcasts. And I don't care because it's true. And also, you just mentioned that you have your firm has been, I think, very efficient and elegant in how you're scaling based upon recommendations and organic and network, like the individual customers networking. So I am actually also a SafetyWing ambassador now, because I am the nomad exec. That's my life, Sondre. Sondre, you're going to laugh. And it's not about me, but it's relevant to this conversation, so I'll say it anyways. I, starting in September of 2024, will be continually a nomad exec. I will not have a residence. I will not have a residential country. I will be moving every 3 to 4 months in other areas. So I'm a digital nomad, but not, if you don't mind me saying it, there's just different levels of it. I'm not 23 going to Bali and trying to figure out how I, cover myself, because if I get a hangover or fall off the scooter, I'm going to be in trouble. This is more of that's a lifestyle, because you are a lifestyle services provider using amazing technology. And that's why we're happy to have you, frankly. And that's why we're interested, because as our organization and as this podcast, it's all about innovation in travel and hospitality. It's all about engagement. It's all about scale. It's a little odd because normally we're not talking to CEOs of companies that we actually believe in, like as a customer, but today it is. And that's why it's really interesting to hear you talk about the starting and how you identified the opportunity and how you're growing sort of on people like me and others like me around the world who are going to be, lifting for all.
No, yeah, absolutely. It is exactly on people like you and sort of word of mouth, the sort of authentic word of mouth is very sustainable, right? Because it doesn't swing up and down, month to month, and sort of long-term relationship building in some sense. And that's maybe slightly harder to get going, but it's so pleasant in the long run because it has a sort of self-perpetuating momentum.
But you're a travel tech company. I mean, that's also who you are. I mean, this is because you have either proprietary and licensed technologies where you've built this platform. And I think as fintech, now we have almost travel fintech, if you know what I'm getting at. Maybe it's a misnomer, I'm not sure. But that's why we were interested in having a discussion with you, because again, we're in the travel, hospitality, and MICE industry, all about innovation. And we identified your firm as a really interesting play in that, that safety net or enabling efficient travel for mid to long-term stays. And that's a really interesting, and it's obviously, back to the trends, a huge trend that's only going to keep going.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, we have been observing that since we started out, that more and more of the travel industry notices this opportunity. And sometimes that's helpful for us. Mostly we're kind of like a bit along for the ride. But, when it comes to, for example, these nomad visas, that's now, I think it's 85 countries implemented it. We didn't invent the idea, but we certainly popularized it. And we're, there in the beginning when Barbados implemented theirs. And that's kind of the motivation of the countries we talk to are always the same, which is that they're implementing those for sort of the same reason as tourism, which is that they just see sort of nomads as these kind of knowledge workers, like they're better than normal tourists, and they stay much longer. So it's seen as like such a clean win in a way. And the fact that they're growing, there's a lot more of them now than there was, and there might be a lot more in the future as well. I saw like since 2019, I saw one stat, it's sort of 3x the number of US people who see themselves as nomads, and I think that was like 16 million. And then there was like another 3x, like 72 million, I think, that said that aspirationally they would like to, if they can, do that in the future. So yeah, no, I do think that is a great thing about it's downstream of remote work, but the possibility to, if you can earn income on the internet, you can live abroad, or you can, and there's a host of different lifestyles potentially that you can, like you said, it's not just the sort of stereotypical one you listed there. There's a range of them, but the point is it's just the whole world opening up, as opposed to you being stuck in wherever commuting distance to your work, which used to be the case.
So one final follow-up before our next question is, it's a question for the two of you, Sondre and Michael as a nomad executive, is we're talking about this global change in knowledge workers, and what are some of the unique things that knowledge workers want where and when they travel? And I'm talking about this, let's draw a psychographic customer persona. What do knowledge workers want when they are living abroad and working abroad?
Like our customers, kind of. Well, what do they want? So one is they like to literally talk to each other. When you have like community building things, co-working spaces, things that say that they're for that segment specifically, that tend to be attractive, not because it's so unique, the service, but because they expect to meet other people like them. Its own little kind of community, right? So it's like they're more technical, they're more creative. There are, some aspects to, but also just a shared lifestyle, right? So it's like, it's something similar. So that's one thing I noticed. So if you can provide the sort of community space, or just like, or even just say, hey, this co-working space is for that, or this other things. I mean, co-working, co-living, I mean, that's tried at this point, but it continues to be a rising thing, and I still see a future where this trend can go a lot further than it does today. So you already have in Asia, I've seen some hotels being rebuilt for this purpose, some resorts, but I think this can go much further, where it's not built for leisure, but it is built, it's kind of like they have one more community, two better working spaces in the hotels, right? I mean, that's the key difference between the sort of digital nomad traveler and is that they work more, right? I mean,
wow,
that's the key difference. So if you have something that used to work for tourists and you want to, there's got to be some good working spaces.
But Sondre, this is a great segue to a lot of our viewers and listeners who are in the pure play hotel industry, right? So, for example, we have relationships. I have been a customer of Selina Hotels for a long time. You know why I just brought them up? Because I think they're one of the top tier, best breed, from execution for that kind of lifestyle. So that's really important. And also what you just said is that there's now a trend for, as there always is a trend in hospitality side of the travel and hospitality industry, for a refresh, for what's the next renovation. A lot of it used to be purely technologically oriented, high-speed internet, IPTV, streaming, etc. Now it's, creating these environments where they can capture the business traveler, capture the tourist traveler, but also in the right locations, capture these longer stay, working traveler, let's put it that way, And to that point, Adam, your question, which is for both of us, in our world, our pure play world, they always said they want a great bed and the Wi-Fi's got to work. Like that's the hotel, that's what they want, a great bed and the Wi-Fi's got to work, and it's got to be for a reasonable price. That's actually not that different in some respects for what a digital nomad is looking for. They want a hub, they want a community, but they want stuff that just works, and they want to onboard and offboard seamlessly and quickly. And one thing why we're interested in talking to you, Sondre, is that the whole side of logistics, security, comfort. I'm not talking about comfort in regards to luxury or comfort in intellectual or emotional comfort, so that when you're traveling, either as a digital nomad or like some people like myself as a nomad exec, You don't have to spend cycles or mental bandwidth on certain things that are mission critical that the right technology or company or service can provide. I think that's huge because there's so many other moving parts as a nomad, nomad exec, a digital nomad, that you want to have the core components as streamlined as possible. You can focus on the challenges you're going to get anyways every day, but those are micro challenges, not macro challenges. And I think,
Yeah.
Sondre, what you guys are doing is eliminating a lot of the macro challenges.
No, I very much agree. I think that's it is certainly in this time, but maybe timeless, as you said in the intro. Simplicity in product, reducing friction and simplicity is definitely the way this kind of person, even likely less tolerant than someone who's like not working that day, I guess. And also because they're used to using internet products, right? So internet products are, a lot of them are from Silicon Valley, but they're just gotten really good at being low friction and simple to use. Where, I completely agree. Like minimizing the checking, maybe keeping the card info so they can just do things without just removing the friction steps wherever they are. I think that's you're not going to be wrong there. Like that's such a safe product strategy.
It's a safe product strategy, but what's interesting is that in the global hospitality and travel world, it's always about guest experience, passenger experience, a patron experience, right? On the front of the house perspective, as we would say. We're the back of the house or in the behind the scenes of the machine of SafetyWing and all the, insurance machinations and regionalities and legalities and delivery and the network of, how a person would interact, gosh forbid, with the healthcare system or service that you're providing or providing an innovative overlay for, is how I see it as a consumer. You're providing an innovative overlay to, the blocking and tackling of this important mission critical part of my life or someone's life, family's life. And we'll talk about it in the next question, I think, but we should really focus also, I think, on the whole expansion of remote organizations, virtual global corporations, and so on. I think that's really interesting for this conversation as well. But Adam, I'll let you move on to the final question. So
we've talked about the present, and now let's focus on the future. So, Sondre, what do you see as the key opportunities and challenges for travel technology companies in 2024 and beyond?
Yeah, and so to kind of angle that into what you said, Michael, virtual companies. There are opportunities here actually in virtual companies, some of them that I would love to share because I'm in this segment myself and I would love more offers, but I also think it's smart. The internet economy is growing. There is already a significant part of new startups are sort of virtual companies, meaning that, which is like SafetyWing is like that, right? Which is that we sell our product on the internet and we work remotely, meaning it's all happening on the internet, right? Both buying and selling and hiring. And there's a lot of unique things about virtual companies. One, they want more tools. They're definitely more flexible. One curious thing I'm, just wonder how this is going to play out is where they're going to register and stuff. I mean, this is already contemplating a little bit. Like a Belgian entrepreneur who's starting a virtual company isn't necessarily doing that in Belgium. They might set up in another, easier to deal with jurisdiction, and location in a way doesn't matter because it's a virtual company anyway. That's one little tidbit to think about. And then, of course, there's the fact that people tend to be a bit spread out. And so if you look at someone like, say, the gatherings become more important, relatively speaking. So a lot of companies will have sort of offsites. But if you're a virtual company and you have a gathering, well, one, that you tend to have a little bit more, and two, they tend to be more invested in. So we, for example, do gathering 2 to 4 times a year, and we invest quite a bit in them. They're important for the company. We had the last one in sort of Iceland, previous one in Bali, your stereotypical place, but it was very nice.
Beautiful there, of course.
Yeah. I think that there is, for example, potential market, and some companies do this, but not a lot, right? So we still figure out this stuff mostly on our own, but we're not alone. So I think that a potential new growing market is team gatherings for remote teams. And
100%.
yeah, and you can be much more flexible with locations. So you can find, it's the same with the nomads and in the remote teams. Like we went to this northern Iceland place. We're more flexible on location. So the benefit for being like close to London or something is lower.
Right. Because it's more about the experience and the gathering than it is about, we're meeting in Paris or Barcelona or London because that's where you got to go. And also it's where people want to go. Whereas you actually want to have an offsite be an offsite in many ways because you're not around each other ever or 3 or 4 times a year. So it totally makes sense. And by the way, just again, back to what we talk about on this podcast a lot in the general travel industry, MICE, so meeting incentives and conventions and events. The MICE industry, which is a subset of the travel industry, what you just talked about is a huge topic. We're involved with different MICE industry.
Oh, really?
It's a Sondre, we'll talk about that offline. Maybe we can do something together, but it's evergreen for them because they're like, wait a second, this is a whole new, these are virtual organizations, could be new clients. They're not the traditional type of clients. They're not looking for just brick and mortar around a convention that's already happening. We're going to do like a one-day offsite. This is how they actually create the stickiness between the humans and the organization. And virtual, as we're doing now, and even VR, which we're also a big proponent of immersive and spatial technology, it's getting better, it's more interesting, but nothing, what I'm going to say, nothing replaces breaking bread, sitting down, shaking someone's hand and looking in their eyes in the real world. So you're absolutely right. From this kind of remote gathering, events space, there's a lot of interest.
Yeah. I mean, look at us as a case study, like us as a company. So we had these gatherings and said we also have a budget for ad hoc sprints. So like every quarter, like a team who wants to like finish a project, they can like use that budget to sort of fly into somewhere and work together for a sprint.
Very smart.
Yeah, and we have like, so an example of a company who does this is a company called Outsite. So we have like one agreement with them, but that's one of the few companies who kind of discovered this. But mostly we still have to just figure everything out by our own from beginning to end. And it is slightly different. Like a lot of the infrastructure made for normal offsite seems very odd to us. Like it's kind of this like midway between the airport and the city in a mid-size or larger city. It's like everything is average. Like it's just that's just not going to work for us because this event is doing much more.
Of course.
So the typical place for an offsite is not relevant. You want it to be more special, basically. It has to be more special because it's carrying much more of the company culture and weight.
Experiential, memorable, and also technologically feasible, financially feasible, efficiencies. And that's where all the other travel tech kicks in because, like you just said, it's kind of a pain in the ass to organize these things. And if you don't have, a dedicated staff, and that's interesting. That's good, very good feedback.
Well, you mentioned mid-sized places and, of course, the financial feasibility. A lot of these mid-sized places have gone by reducing costs to offer that incentive for regrouping there. I'm not going to mention any specific cities or localities. And as a business owner yourself, Sondre, how do you decide to devote budget to somewhere that is more experiential or for a sprint to allocate that line item and have that budget set aside versus really tightening the purse strings and focusing on pure product development or sales, staffing up, increasing headcount? How do you justify that expense for these experiential get-togethers versus other things?
I think that if you imagine like what makes a company work over time, this sort of driving things underneath this sort of joyful and productive team, if that isn't there, then like if people are intrinsically motivated because it seems worthwhile, right? And this is special and unique in some way, then you can tolerate not everything else being perfect. If that isn't there, then it's just like an auction almost. So it's like, it's kind of like you have to choose which place you want to be in. And, we're firmly in this is not an auction, right? This is a unique company with a profound, mission in a different way to operate. And that has, if you can achieve it, that has a great benefit. Obviously, that's a great output benefit. It means people don't quit. It means they do more than they have to, right? And so that's like underneath that, and we track that. And in some sense, it might be the thing we do best actually in the company. We track it in the same way. Would you recommend working here to a friend? So last month, that's always like above 9 for us out of 10. Like almost everybody would in the company do that. So that's probably where, like, in terms of like, how do I justify that? That's how I do it. There is also, of course, this logic about the higher utility in organizing, and the quality of the ideas are affected by the spaces that you're in a little bit. It's kind of like Tesla having like their kind of QA going over the car on like a bamboo floor. It's a bit easier to see the faults in something when it's on like a very beautiful surface. So you are affected by the spaces that you're in. I mean, I certainly think so. One last thing though, and that's a quibble with the premise of the question, because I do think that you can have bad taste. So spending a lot of money isn't like when we do these things, it's the taste that's the major difference. It's not that we spend 10 times more.
It's the curation, because of other silicon historically, it's kind of cliche or trope, throwing big money at fancy events or fancy destinations just to sort of impress or create some sort of we're cool, we're better than. But one thing you said, Sondre, that's really interesting, and it's funny how it's universal even with this whole new world of virtual organizations and travel tech and everything else. Business is about people. It's not about products and services. Of course, it's about products and services, but I mean, really, all businesses are about people. It's either the inventory goes down the elevator at night, virtual or traditional company. You said basically what I think you were saying, if you don't want me paraphrasing, was motivated, positive, secure, and happy employees or happy partners produce great work. And creating environments, even in a virtual organization, which is now and more will become, I don't know if it'll ever become the predominant, but it's going to become a significant minority of organizations moving forward, are either going to transition to virtualized organizations or they're going to be virtualized organizations. It's still about creating environment through technology, through security, through environments, curation, like the right kind of location, the right kind of experience for the physical gatherings as a complement to the virtual engagement.
Yeah, something like that. And no, I mean, that was, it definitely you're that's fair. And by the way, I just recalled our Iceland gathering, which is such a clear example of the taste versus cost thing. And what's really needed is a care. Is that we had a new person coming in, and she made a bid, and she did the one where she kind of didn't realize that we're like more a virtual company, and this, so she actually first proposed the kind of this sort of boxy 3-star halfway between the airport and Reykjavik hotel, and we're like, no, that's not what we're about. I mean, it was just she just proposed that. She previously worked at Hilton. This is a normal thing to propose when someone's booking outside, I suppose. But the cost per night that we ended up at this amazing experience, at this beautiful hotel, we had the whole thing. It's like on the edge of this like fjord where there was nothing else, and there's like mountains up in the northern Iceland. We flew our own plane up there. The cost per person was the same in the end in those two options. So the thing that makes the other one is more like, in that specific case, it was definitely not the cost that was the difference. It's more like the curiosity or the something like to find that more experiential thing. Sometimes it's cost, of course.
Of course. What's this?
So one final question here, Sondre, and
Yeah.
a little bit of hypothetical, but you're speaking to two believers here. One is your customer, a nomad executive, and we're talking about the future, which is to say this whole idea of virtual companies is going to grow. How much? Based on all the travel trends and research you've read, it is where it is today in 2024 as catalyzed by the pandemic. Where is it going to be by 2030 in terms of just a broad multiple based on your litmus test thinking? How much is it going to grow, do you think?
Yeah, I'm not able to do it on the fly, but I do think that you can answer that pretty realistically in the following way. So there are two segments: the nomads and the remote teams or virtual companies. So that's two different segments, and that's who we sell to, and that's the areas. When I think I mentioned this earlier, but like when the nomads, it was accelerated. Remote work was accelerated about 5x to where it would have been on trend. So some things during COVID, it went sort of up and down. E-commerce was one. Like it went back to trend. So it didn't fall like below trend, but it sort of went back to where it would have been. You just squint at the graph to where it would have been. But not remote work. That was like 3% kind of growing like this. And then it went up, peaked at like 30 and then down again to 18. But it would have been at between 4 and 5 at trend. So it's way above trend. So remote is one of those lasting things. But it has over the last couple of years, so like we're in a way past the post-pandemic reversion. And we've now kind of you can see it just basically continuing creeping upwards. By 2030, we'll be 6 years into whatever that transition number is. I would guess, if that number is accurate, that it's 18% of overall workforce being remote. I guess I would guess maybe it certainly is between 25 and 30%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yes, it's one in 3 organizations. I mean, that's people. Some people are sleeping at the wheel on this, and you know that, Sondre. Like there are some folks who understand. Yes, people are WFH, and they just call work from home. They just think they oversimplify it. Whereas this is obviously a legitimate corporate strategy. It's not because of reaction. It's a proactive strategy for the right businesses, obviously, and the right types of employees, the right types of markets, etc. But one in 3.
1 in 3 by that point. And when you have what you also see, of course, where it will end up. So the driving force with the increase does happen in some industries more than others. When you look at tech, so if you look at like tech only work job sites, so there's one called Hacker News. It's quite popular in Silicon Valley. It's only for tech jobs. And I saw this graph, which was that pre-pandemic, 20% of the jobs there had location remote. And post-pandemic, it was 80. But that went up to 80 during the pandemic. That never went down. That's still 80%. So that sort of tells you what's happening in the professions that are where it's clearly possible to make a virtual company. And there it's just like it's 80%.
And again, to wrap it up for wrapping up our podcast, but why we reached out to you in the first place is because travel and hospitality is a huge part of not only what you're providing to your travel and hospitality, like customers who are consuming those services, just in general, as a virtual organization, travel and hospitality, destination, whatever, is a huge part of a virtual organization in many ways as well. So it's kind of like you're living it and you're providing for it at the same time.
Totally. Basically, the whole office budget goes to travel. That's basically it. So, I mean, it's a huge opportunity for travel. And I think the virtual organizations is going to be a big growing market in the future.
Well, Sondre, it's been fantastic having you on. And I really hope that listeners and viewers really take your company seriously and the trend behind it in terms of remote work and nomad executivism. It is an ism now. Sondre, thank you.
Thank you both. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for listening to the Gain Momentum podcast. To stay up to date, make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Gain Advisors, head to gainadvisors.com.